Hi, I think we're already live. So I'm going to just start. I am Jane Frizzell, and these are the Winter 2025 Steinbrecht Sessions, where we are going through the section of Gymnasium of the Horse where Steinbrecht spells out ride your horse forward and set him straight. Or set your horse straight and ride him forward, depending on which side of the Rhine you came from. It all is the same. Now, last week, we, or I should say, hammered on his sentence on the top of page 72. I have the edition from the 90s. Your pagination may be off by 2 or 3 pages. But last Tuesday, I hammered home this statement he makes. This following alone determines the way of going. And way of going, it's a horseman's phrase or term, and it means the overall use of self by the horse, how the horse uses himself. So the way of going is determined by this following. And what following is that? That the hind legs of the horse step directly into the front footprints of the horse so that he's tracking on each side of his body directly straight according to his line of travel. Now, that sounds simple and it's so rare to see. The obsession with inside hind to outside rein has completely defiled this. And it's a problem. So I don't know why my voice is scratchy. This following alone determines the way of going, because we're going to get into the science now a little bit, and then we're going to go back a sentence or two. Okay. This following alone determines the way of going. And we have to cause the hind legs to follow correctly. And if you want to read ahead, he's going to explain that very well and completely. He does throughout the next few pages, but he especially gets it done on page 75. All right. This following alone determines the way of going, because here's the science part of the physics lesson. The thrust of the hindquarters becomes more effective the straighter, i.e., more directly, it acts against the body mass. So the more directly, the more straightly directly, the hindquarters, which are the strongest part of the horse, act against the mass to move it forward. The more directly they act, the better the going. This is according to the principle that a pushing or lifting force must always be directed toward the center of gravity of the load. So that's the science why, but I just hope that's evident. That should just be self-evident. Now, where are mistakes made here that we are often encountering in the horse world? The cowboys, the clinic cowboys, are notorious for this. And so are many of the classical prissy girls who don't go forward. They are obsessed with getting the hind legs underneath the horse. But it is sort of cosmetic. We don't I'm not trying to get my horse's hind legs under him. I'm trying to get them under that which he must carry, under the load. And that is a significant difference. It's either, I don't remember if it's Baudin or Phyllis or Steinbrecht himself who talks about the billy goat on the rock. So the little billy goat's on the rock and he gets his back legs he gets his back legs really close to his front legs underneath him. But that's not a good position to be in if you're a horse. Billy goats have more of a little spring, but it's not what we're talking about here. We're wanting the hindquarters to act as directly, straightly as possible upon the load itself, the mass to be advanced. This is going to reference you back to where he says, namely the desire to move the load forward on page 71. My book. This book is this is my second one. Okay, so this is really, he's really bringing this up, that the hind legs, first of all, the hind legs must follow correctly. And when they are doing so, then we are causing them to act against the load, the mass. Then the better and cleaner and more directly, efficiently we can cause that or enable that to happen through practice, the better the way of going, the overall use of self by the horse, and the whole way of going is improved. Okay, I think that I think that's clear enough now. So I want to now go back a sentence. He's talking about the trainer. The trainer cannot accomplish this by guidance alone. You can't steer a forehand to be, or you can't steer the mass to be better in front of the hindquarters. It just can't be done. That is the folly of absolute elevation or the folly of front to back riding. The trainer, he cannot accomplish this by guidance alone, but must support the work of his hands with his legs in order to cause the hind legs to follow correctly. I cannot, my hand doesn't inform my horse's hindquarters, and it doesn't, except tangentially. I mean, some idiot's going to argue that, but no, my leg informs the hindquarters. He cannot accomplish this by guidance alone, but must support the work of his hands with his legs in order to cause the hind legs to follow correctly. Now, I want to zero in on this word he uses, support. When these old guys in different languages, they're talking about the supporting aids. He's not saying I support my hands with my legs, because that would make it like the hand is predominant and superior to the leg, and the leg just has like an understudy role to support the hand if needed. That's not what is meant by support here. Support is meant like foundationally, like first of all, the foundation that the whole house is built on, that is the support upon which we construct the system of the going. So first of all, the hindquarters are going. And this is generated by the rider's leg. That is the underlying support foundation. And the hand, you really can't use your hand without unless you have the underpinning support of the correctly going hindquarters, which is generated by the legs or introduced by the leg. The leg as an aid, not as a bashing mechanism. Okay, that's so important. Okay. So I think I'm going to just say it one more time. So support, he's not meaning that my leg is like the understudy for my hand. Like if my hand gets into trouble, then my leg will step in and help out. That's not what he means by support. He means foundation. Like this is the support on which the structure is constructed. Like the foundation of my house. They poured the foundation, they leveled it, they made it perfect. My arena has a foundation base. It was it, and then the sand, it supports the footing. It's not secondary to the footing. It's primary, instigating before the footing. That's what I mean. Okay. And so when they're talking about supporting aids, they're not talking about the understudy or the backup singers. It's talking about, first of all, do this and then continue on. And what follows the support foundation can then be attended to, but the support is first. Okay. Not an understudy, not a backup singer. Okay, I hope I made that point it's very, very, very important. Now, he cannot accomplish this by the guidance alone, but must support the work of his hands with his legs in order to cause the hind legs to follow correctly. So my my natural aid, the leg, has to convince the hindquarters and hind legs of the horse to activate on their own, to follow the forehand directly straight, the way he's saying, but also to have their own yearning to advance the load. Now, I'm going to now move us to page 73 to a different paragraph. We're going to skip ahead 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs and go 5 paragraphs ahead to talk about this a little more. And we'll probably go back over it in order later. The rider should not, it's the paragraph that starts, the rider should not try to put the load on the hindquarters primarily with his hands. Through forward driving aids, that means the car is in drive gear. It doesn't mean harassing, pushing, driving like a slave master drives. Through the forward driving aids, namely the supporting aid, putting the vehicle into gear by the weight, and then the leg coming on to say move. He, the trainer, must cause the hind legs to step more underneath the weight and thus take on the load themselves. That's why I use the word yearning, that the horse has his own desire to take on the weight himself. Nobody can make a horse take on the weight. We can, if he doesn't decide to do it, he has to have his own desire to do this. We can convince him to do it, but we can't make him do it. But convincing him is our task. Now, I'm getting into what if the horses don't do it? Well, none of them want to do it at the beginning, because it's like me saying, put on a rucksack and run 10 miles. He'll say, well, could I just leave the rucksack but in the locker room? And we say, oh, no, my darling. But as he becomes enabled through practice, he will get a little more keen for his rucksack because because of the benefit of the training. Horses aren't dumb, and we have to make them want to. He has to have his own desire to carry, his own desire. So he sees the task, he sees the line that he must go, and he has to go, I'm going to carry this, advance this load forward on it. The major called it lust. He mistranslated the word desire and he called it lust. So yearning, lust, desire, whatever you want to call it, we convince and enable the horse through practice to have a desire to take on the load. Now, that is submission, but that has nothing to do with a slave. That has to do with him wanting to do it. Okay, so through our forward driving aids, our weight causing engagement and the leg at the girth activating that loaded hindquarter to then move, the trainer causes the hind legs to step more underneath the weight and thus take on the load themselves. Now, this is an interesting way he says it, because the horsey, like at first he goes, I will take on the weight, and he has to make this decision, but then it becomes like we are training his butt. Like it stops going through his mind, because once he makes the decision, he's submitted, and we are then training hindquarters, and he's letting us, and he's into it. The hindquarters take on the load themselves. So he's going to bring up the hands again. The hands must then either rest passively and just be there to prevent the horse from rushing forward, like, yikes, this is so heavy, I'm going to we go, oh, no, my darling, stay loose and you're going to be able to, yes. Or the hand must act with so-called through going half halts to move or to incrementally continue to move or shift the load even more decisively backward in order to bend. What he means by that is flex the, how can I show this angle? Flex, close the huge angles of the hindquarter joints. That are forward moving. So when he's talking about through going half halts, he's talking about stay loose, don't send it, you can't put that weight here, keep getting it. And the horse is going to learn. The green horse, his hips are stiff, and when they're carrying a weight, they're like, oh, this is like a big, huge, simple box, and I can only push it one way. But he's going to learn that he can manage the load. He's going to start to get flexible. He's going to start to learn about the angles of the giant bones of his hindquarters, and he's going to start to learn to manage this weight as he's going, as he's advancing it. That's what we enable through practice. And I would even, oh, it's so scary to say that even bring up that the hand could, with through going half halts, assist in this. I just get scared of that because it's so misused. Our hand will keep him loose in his mind, and keep the weight of our seat softly addressing, bending or flexing these giant hindquarter joints. Okay, have we gotten us through that sentence? Are you following along here? Now I'm about to open a huge subject with this next subject. He opens the subject, and we're going to return to it in another series similar to this one that I will begin when this one ends, probably in the spring. It may even be summer at the rate we're going through these 5 pages. But I'm going to bring that up now as he is bringing it up. The elevation of the forehand. The forehand being the entire section of the horse in front of the girth. I'm not just talking about his shoulders. I'm not talking about his poll. I'm talking about every cell of him in front of the girth, okay? The elevation of the forehand then comes automatically. The more the hindquarters are lowered and bent, and write this in the margin, by weight bearing. I'm going to reread it. The elevation of the forehand then comes automatically the more the hindquarters are lowered and bent by weight bearing. And this is what was known by Steinbrecht as the Aufrichtung, relative elevation. The withers, so my horse starts like this. I start teaching these hindquarters to load more and take weight. And the wither from the girth forward starts to come up as the hindquarters become more load bearing. Relative elevation, I always call it uphillness. I've used the term uphillness to Germans and they said, oh, yeah, that's right. Uphillness is referencing that the horse is uphill from croup to withers. The horse can be uphill with his nose in the sand. Very important to understand, because uphillness and die Aufrichtung, this relative elevation, the elevation of the forehand, it comes automatically. I do not dick around with my hands trying to lift the forehand, ever. Verboten, you're out of this program if you think you can do that. That is a lie from the pit of hell, a fallacy promulgated by classical French who forgot to read section 34 of Sommer, which has to do with coxofemoral articulation. Same thing. Okay. Yeesh. Now, this is a technical discussion. But I hope I've made it clear and convincing. I don't think I need to go back and reread it. What I would love is that after these Steinbrecht sessions and after we've gone through every line, you will then be able to just read this, go, yeah. Yeah. Because these pages, this page used to be a narcotic for me. For 20 years, at least, it was a narcotic for me. Now, I want to bring something up that's also going to come up later this week when I am going to be spending some time sharing a video and talking about Major Lindgren's oval. Does anyone remember what he says the purpose of the oval is? It's in italics. It's the very first exercise of the book. And it's what he says is the purpose of that oval. That exercise of the most simple forms of curved lines and straight lines. Okay, so we've really delved into this sentence on page 72. He cannot accomplish this by guidance alone with the hands, but must support the work of his hands with his legs in order to cause the hind legs to follow correctly. How the hind legs are follow correctly is really spelled out on page 75. several weeks in front of us. I jumped us to page 73 to look at it a little more closely. And I also pointed out that when these dead guys talk about the supporting aids, they're not talking about the understudy or the backup singers. They're talking about the main deal, the support of the whole system, the first thing of all.